Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you from these United States, broadcasted outside the Mercy One KWKY Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. This is The Uncommon Good, and it is wonderful to get to join you. I am Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And thank you for joining us on this Wednesday. I am out here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Executive Vice President of the Newman Idea. You can check out both of those at mchs.edu and the newmanidea.org. Bud, you're out there yonder in Pittsburgh. What do you do in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, holding down the fort here in Pittsburgh, PA. I'm not right now in the offices of the National Institute for Newman Studies, where I normally spend my weekdays. But you can find all about what we're doing at the Newman Institute, newmanstudies.org.
But it's good to hear from you. And we said last time, this is sort of radio show number 2 from a very different world. We want to throw out at the top of the hour that things like radio hopefully have come to a new sort of importance in people's life, because I know a lot of us, we're spending a lot more time home these days due to the national crisis. We're hoping that by providing something like The Uncommon Good, that you guys get to have, through the radio, a connection, a community with the wider community. And so we're very happy and honored to be, Bud and I here, part of your community, helping you through what we're facing together. So, Bud, I don't know, I've been seeing on the interwebs that people are really bearing down and, using social media to show what they're up to during the quarantine. Do you have any recipes or sewing, knick-knacky sort of things that you've done with all your new free time that you need to share?
It's funny, but we feel really blessed here in the sense that our kids homeschool, so their schedule hasn't been too much disruptive, and Rachel and I have been able to be with them a bit more. And then of course I've been able to work from home a bit. But honestly, I don't know about you, but this whole turn of events has me even evaluating. Last week we got into maybe how society is structured in ways that this recent crisis can have us rethink things. I'm like, man, it'd be really nice to have a greenhouse and a garden and some canned goods in the pantry and things like that. So hopefully I'll maintain that motivation after we're in the clear here at some point.
Right. Yeah. No, I would suppose that all of the energy my kids currently have could be really used for churning butter. But I don't hardly trust them making toast currently. This is not true. Actually, Stella, our oldest daughter, she's actually getting really good at cooking. But the other ones, I'm not sure what we would end up if they were trying to be, the Bonner version of Amish. But we're getting along. I'm sure a lot of people, think that too. This is new for a lot of people. I will say, being a homeschooler family, they're not around that much more than they used to be. But we make sure to go drive around every so often, just so that we can see something different than the inside of the walls.
Well, as a trained theologian, incidents like this always make me a bit nervous, because you do sometimes, especially on social media, see things out there that are a bit unfortunate, where I think those who have a public voice are trying to read the tea leaves, so to speak, too precisely. But I think whenever, of course, we have trials or difficulties, hopefully we can ask, what would God want me to draw out of this? Not, is this the hand of God, or, can I discern exactly why this is happening? But like you said, churning butter, I'd recommend it, folks.
Well, nice. Speaking of people who are going to be bringing good out of the darkness of these days, we want to once more praise everybody who is in the medical field. They're the front line of treating people who are facing this disease. And I know here in Iowa, it's been an honor to be a part of Mercy College of Health Science. And even in our small way, although Bud and I have not trained them in any way to actually help people's health, So you should be assured that they're actually good healthcare providers. We have had the chance to teach them medical ethics, servant leadership, and we're very proud of them. So underwriter of our show, Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu. We've moved to online instruction, but we're going to, of course, be doing instruction coming up in the summer and fall. And no matter what's going on in this crisis, we'll be teaching the next generation of nurses and allied healthcare workers. So please, mchs.edu, go check that out. And again, thank you, Mercy College, for underwriting our show.
Yeah, Bo, I know today we're going to try to pivot the conversation a bit and focus on, something a bit brighter, not to dwell too much on the difficulties, but just real quickly, like with your mentioning of training healthcare professionals, it really has been an amazing time. And you read church history and you read about, pandemics in the past or plagues and things like this. And I have been deeply moved by our medical professionals that are sacrificing here, but also, sad to say, quite a few priests in Italy died basically ministering during their last days to those who are sick. And so, a lot to pray for and people to be grateful for these days.
No, that's absolutely true. Pray for your family. Pray, of course, for a cure. But like you said, those people on the front lines, both like body and spirit, the medical workers, and then the priest ministering to those who are, all of us in these difficult times, but specifically for those who are suffering from this disease. As Bud alluded to, we're going to have on one of my, a very longtime friend of mine, Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs, who is an artist. You can actually check out her work at GwynethThompsonBriggs.com. It's Gwyneth, like GWYNETH, GwynethThompsonBriggs.com. There's all sorts of things to say about her. She actually had a painting that she had that she did for Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. So that's on its own absolutely cool. And we're going to talk to her about the importance of sacred art in times like these. So this is the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back with Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs right after this. The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr, coming to you from outside the Mercy One Live Up Studios this Wednesday for the Uncommon Good. Thank you for joining the show once more. Our guest today is a longtime friend of mine, Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs. I've known Gwyneth because of Our Lady of the Annunciation Monastery down in Clear Creek. And then from then on, we've actually been friends doing just keeping in touch, but also, for instance, doing things like working on a children's book together. That's a whole side project that we'll have to tell everyone about at some other time. Gwyneth is an artist. Well, first of all, I want to point out that not only is she an artist, but she has a master's degree in engineering systems in Colorado School of Mines. So she can bury Bud and I math-wise if we wanted to have a math contest on air. And then besides that, an extremely accomplished artist. Her website, GwynethThompsonBriggs.com, shows you a lot of this. But the thing out of the gate that I just want to point out to people is you go to GwynethThompsonBriggs.com, the About page, and right at the top, what do you have? But Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI receiving Gwyneth's version of St. Augustine. So she knows what she's doing, and her art is beautiful. Gwyneth, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy Feast Day.
The Feast of the Annunciation, I figure, what a better day to actually talk about the role of beauty, especially with what we're dealing with today. So I guess out of the gate, I'll ask you that are there any artworks of the Annunciation that you would recommend maybe to our listeners to go look up in honor of the feast?
Well, once this crisis has abated, I would say don't just look it up, but go visit the monastery of San Marco in Florence, and there you will see my favorite Annunciation by Blessed Fra Angelico. I'm not sure, but I think it probably helped that he's a blessed and painted just this wonderful, wonderful reflection of Gabriel and Our Lady.
Now, Gwyneth, don't you think there's something when it comes to the fact of the importance of sacred art in the Christian tradition? I'm not going to say this as well as I think you might be able to, but it's sort of the fact of the Virgin Mary herself sort of begs for the artistic representation and flourishing that occurred in Christianity. Of course, Jesus Christ, God becoming man, as the theological arguments have shown throughout time, has sort of proven that God wants to be sort of rendered to the human eye, if you were, right? The incarnation proves that God doesn't want to remain forever behind an invisible cloud. He's reached out to us so that we can be tangible, that he can be a part of our sensory life. But there's something particularly about the Virgin Mary in her life, that she was visited by Gabriel on the feast today, that she carried Christ in her womb, held him at her breast, lived it life with him, and then held him at the Pieta. I know that that's a stark claim, but it seems to me that there's something about the Virgin herself that really spurred the Christian imagination into the deep artistic tradition that we have.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And you have not only Our Lady herself, who just is beauty, but she everything that seems to flow from her is beautiful as well, and that draws souls to Christ. I've been thinking a lot about the importance of the incarnation and our physical experience of the beauty of art and also the created world, especially now when it seems like we're compelled to live a virtual life more and more each day, going online to see images, to get news, to connect with others. And I realize, wow, when you extract those physical experiences of being with a loved one or seeing a work of art in person, or just being near plants as they're growing, there is no replacement for that physical experience. We're made body and soul. So
Gwyneth, this is Bud Marr. Thanks for being on the show. I know this is it's almost kind of a proof text to go to when talking about Christian art, where the woman anoints Christ with this expensive nard. And yes. Judas, of course, says, couldn't this have been sold and the money donated to the poor? And I think Christian theologians have always taken that as a sign that for us, for our communities, there's something to be said about, quote unquote, wasting money on the beautiful and on what needs to be adored. Could you talk some about your own journey as an artist and maybe living in this culture, how you've, I feel like we live in a very hard-nosed, pragmatic culture where, money needs to go to things that really help people. And that's very, practical. Just maybe a theology of art and how you've thought about your own vocation as an artist.
Yeah, well, I'd say, it's interesting because, as Bo mentioned, I was an engineer for a while and was very unhappy because that was not my vocation. So I retired. And, the compensation and worldly respect for an artist is really nothing like what you would receive as an engineer. People are always impressed by math for some reason. And so in my own life, I've really realized money isn't everything, and there's so much compensation that's due to just being able to do what you love and what inspires you and having the time to do it. But also, too, even though I'm living in a lower tax bracket now, I'm experiencing so much more beauty, frankly, rather than going to a cubicle. And living here in St. Louis, this is a pretty rough city, and there's a lot of parts of the city where I think about families, and especially children, that go through day-to-day life without a lot of beauty or luxury or anything. And so when I create artwork, especially for churches, I think, gosh, on Sundays, this may be the one experience of beauty that these kids are going to experience. And so I think it's, in a way, it's for the poor more than for anyone else that needs this consolation of beauty and this uplifting sight on the true end goals of our life. But
no, Gwyneth. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the hardest things for me is pricing for works of art, And, you think like, gosh, why would I spend thousands of dollars for a painting when I could just get a print for, $50 or something? And one of the aspects of that that I think people aren't aware of is the actual craft and tradition that goes into the design and execution of a work of art. And so recently I founded a directory online called the Catholic Artists Directory, .com, and that's a way of really learning about all of the working and living artists today who are trying to cultivate and continue traditions of art that would be lost within a generation or two if they're not passed down.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. Yes, I think it's imperative for people to understand this connection between beauty and justice. And it's not simply because I have plenty of artist friends and family members. I have my aunt, Rebecca Mantrick. She does stuff. Of course, Gwyneth, you have stuff that people need to go check out. I'm just naming off a few people. Andrew Wilson Smith, a personal friend of mine who does the statuary and things like this. It's not just a matter of, like I want justice for my friends, although that's absolutely the truth. And I think people need to be more specific about that. There's also just the justice of what we owe towards beauty itself, as it were. There's a secular author named Elizabeth Scary, who wrote a book called On Beauty, and then has an essay in there called On Beauty and Justice. And even from a secular point of view, she really starts to argue that this has been completely lost for utilitarian reasons. And this idea of just, we can print stuff off, we can make sort of like Andy Warhol prints of whatever was made famous, a few years ago, or even timeless classics, and then that's good enough. The argument she makes, but then I think if the theological one is even stronger, is that people forget that the poor are not somehow less human than the rich. And the idea that only people who have wealth or free time deserve beauty is a horrible offense to the poor. And I've always lauded, I had this class when I was in the Diocese of Wichita. Wichita spent all this money to redo their cathedral, and it's actually very beautiful. And people, you would occasionally hear, like, why would you spend money? Very much the Judas thing, like Bud pointed out. Why would you spend money renovating this cathedral? And we always pointed out, well, what you need to do is go on the steps of the cathedral, literally turn around and look what's across the street. And it was the Lord's Diner, where they fed people 3 times a day. And people pointed out, like, those people who would go into the Lord's Diner are not allowed in any living room that has a personal painting. But if they went into the cathedral, that was high art that most people acted like wasn't for them. But to think that is to straight be abusive towards the poor, to act like that they don't have a need for beauty as well. And so I think when people might ask, like, why would you have someone come on and talk about sacred art and beauty on a podcast about the common good? One of the things we are lacking profoundly in a common way is common beauty. And when you line up cities, when you line up spaces for people based on efficiency or, what's cool or what's hip, as the kids say, what you're really going to miss out on is this public demand for justice of the beautiful, not only for the beauty itself, but specifically for the people who, like you said, don't get beauty anywhere else because we've sort of acted like it's the province of just a few people.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's also this strange relationship that I don't fully understand, but I realize it's there between suffering and beauty and sacrifice and beauty. And so it makes sense that you can't just, easily procure something beautiful. Like you either have to make a financial sacrifice to obtain it, or you need to go through a lot of training in order to execute it. And so just like anything worthwhile, there is this sacrifice involved.
Gwyneth, I would reiterate Bo's recommendation to our listeners to certainly visit your website, GwynethThompson-Briggs.com. And just being there and looking at some of the paintings, I was really moved by some of these images, but curious as well. I know, that I would say, like, in the Catholic world, it's fair to say that it's been kind of a rough patch in some ways for art, because I think some artists have had a difficult time like transmitting the tradition in a modern context. And modernity, there's elements of the culture and of like artistic assumptions that maybe cut against the grain of our tradition. And you blend a lot of like traditional themes with, well, I'm not sure what, like how you would describe your style of art, but could you talk about the influences on your painting and how you think about the relationship between tradition, but also presenting that in a way that, modern people can grab a hold of?
Yeah, absolutely. My formal training was primarily with a school called the Boston School of Art, which maybe the most famous artist one might know from that period would be John Singer Sargent, where it's really all about rendering the beauty of how light hits an object in the natural world. So there's nothing inherently supernatural about that tradition, but that technique then sort of got combined with, I have such a love for works from the Renaissance and the Baroque. There is very little training from that period of art in those techniques. So a lot of my training, I guess, in that area has just been doing a lot of reading from texts and just trying to do my best to do copies from museums. But it's been so difficult to find training, and especially for composing larger works that have multiple figures or supernatural lighting effects. A lot of artists turn to Photoshop almost exclusively and work from photos, but I firmly believe that if you use traditional approaches of studying models from life and actual physical draperies, things like that, you get a much, much different effect. I always think, I might not end up being that good, but at least I can discover a lot of techniques that I can pass on to the next generation of artists at a much younger age, and they can bring the skill level up to a much higher technique. I always think about, in the tradition of sacred music, some of the most wonderful musicians were all steeped in Gregorian chant. And that, I think, is an essential clue that we need to be steeped in the traditional forms of art before we should set about creating anything original or contemporary. So there needs to be a certain level of humility on the part of the artist to sort of go through a very long apprenticeship with other living masters and masters who have died hundreds of years before us.
No, Gwyneth, on that point, I think this is maybe more art history, but it gets to this bigger idea about the sort of community aspect of art. Even someone like Picasso, who I am not a fan of really in any sort of way, if you look at all of his early paintings, though, the man learned the sort of school of previous art. You can see in his early paintings that he painted stuff that he wouldn't be noticed for later, like the cubism and things like this. And so in the modern world, there really does seem to be the problem of revolutionary sons, is what I always say. The revolutionaries, whether it be in political philosophy, music, art, they were steeped in the masters. So when they did something really new and revolutionary, I'm not saying that like what they did was necessarily warranted or whatever it is, but they were proficient masters who could usually pull off the crazy stuff they were doing precisely because they were standing, quote unquote, on the shoulder of giants. The problem is a lot of people after these revolutionary figures, they'll cut off the vine that made them. And then everybody else is trying to be just as revolutionary as the people who came afterwards. And quite frankly, they're just bad. Like they've not learned what's gone before. And so it's really difficult for them to truly make the thing as revolutionary as they think it is. It just becomes mawkish or childish, or just, all of the things that go wrong, not only with painting and music, but political orders and philosophy. And so I think that speaks, like you said, to once more the sort of social element of art and the common good. If there is not a shared tradition to be steeped in, like you're saying, there really can't be any innovation. And that sort of paradox, probably a lot of people sort of miss that if they don't take the time to read a little further.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think our society in general doesn't quite understand the idea of that if you live according to rules and apparent restrictions, you actually have more freedom. I find in the sense of creative freedom, I went to a contemporary art college before I received my real training, I think. And really there was this pressure that every day you had to do something original and different. And, talk about creative block. You sit there in front of a piece of paper and somebody says, draw anything. Well, I don't know. That's really hard to come up with. But if somebody gives you a piece of paper and says, now I want you to draw, a dragon with fire coming out of its mouth and wings, there's an infinite number of dragons you could draw, but suddenly within these restrictions, creativity is spurred. So, I think that within these traditional forms, there's actually a much greater possibility for creative fruitfulness and beauty.
Well, Gwyneth, this has been great so far. We're going to go to break, so stick around, because after we get back from the break, more from Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs. This is the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Joining you this Wednesday, broadcasting from outside the Mercy One Iowa Catholic Radio studios. You can listen to us on all of our radio affiliate stations. You can listen online, iowacatholicradio.com. But then, of course, especially in this time when you might not be driving around in your car as much, remember that you can download the Iowa Catholic Radio app and listen wherever you have internet or data connections. Iowa Catholic Radio, the Iowa Catholic Radio app. Today on the show, we are talking with my good friend Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs, artist extraordinaire. You can go look at her work at GwynethThompsonBriggs.com. And as I always point out, like, which Gwyneth is it? Gwyneth, and then Thompson-Briggs with 2 G's. Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs. Gwyneth, thanks for joining the show again.
Thanks for having me back.
So one of the things we were talking about at the last part before the break was the sort of justice element in beauty, that, for instance, the poor by justice deserve beauty, that it's not just the province of a special few. Since we're all body and soul, we deserve that our souls are stimulated, and art is this wonderful reflection of the incarnational reality of Jesus Christ, because art truly is a place where the physical world and the spiritual world meet. It is tailor-made, as it were, for the human person to become fully themselves. Now, we lighted on many of the sort of difficulties that sacred art and art done well have faced in the modern world, not only when how artists get trained or just how society is set up, but this can seem like too big of a problem. Does one of us have to become, the ruler of our nation and in order to, really kickstart patronage of the arts again? Do we have to earn a lot of money in order to be able to, get a revival of art going on? But Gwyneth, I thought you've always done a good job of talking to people about the small, local, particular ways that we can start threading beauty back into our own family life, and that it's going to take certain grassroots elements like this before we can hope for a society that understands the role of art in its public manner. So for the listeners out there, what are ways, if they're feeling compelled by what they're hearing talking to you today, what are things that they can personally do to start threading this public role of beauty into their own lives?
Yeah, well, I think it needs to start with a bit of a meditation on the fact that there's nothing is too good for God, and that we were talking about justice to our fellow man and providing beauty to the least of us, but also in justice to God. He gives us so many blessings. The least we can do is return some of the gifts that He's given us. And I always think about on altars, whenever I see artificial flowers, I think, gosh, what a shame God gave us real flowers and we're giving him these plastic things back. It just seems like that's one of the worst injustices. So, so starting, just with even flowers. I mean, I think no matter what your home altar looks like, you can make it a point to make it symmetrical and tidy and have real candles and have real flowers. And it can become an important place of the center for your family's prayer. And I've been thinking a lot about what to do during Holy Week. I mean, it sounds like for people across the nation, we might not be able to attend the Triduum. And so for all of us, but especially for those of us with small children, how do we make the experience of the Triduum tangible? Have you thought about that with your own family?
Yeah, I was going to say I've been worried about that as well, and in many ways, we just this last Sunday sort of tumbled into figuring out what we're going to do. But it's one thing to go, and very grateful to the priests that do things like you said, like live stream and things like this. But there's still something that is missing if that's not done within our own homes. And so, being a Benedictine Oblate, I've thrown in aspects of the office with the monks. We've really battened down the hatches and started doing novenas, particularly to saints, the novena leading up to the Annunciation today, for instance. But I think that if coming up, we're going to have to, like you said, become resourceful about how at our home altars, what are we going to try to do? But I think an easy one is, like you're pointing out, about darkness and light. Most of us have some candles. I know 2020 is the future, but I think all of us have a candle or two. And maybe something with children as simple as turning out all the lights in your house and then lighting the one candle and having everybody, light their candles from the one source. That's really powerful. Of course, if I'm a convert, so I very much remember doing that the first night that I converted on the midnight mass for Easter. But that seems like something that we can all do at our homes, like you say, to make the Triduum Mass tangible.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got a couple of toddlers myself, and I'm looking forward to the experience that they'll have when usually on Passion Sunday we cover all of the religious art in our home with veils, and just as they do in the churches, and our home altar is pretty much bare. It's very austere. And then on Holy Thursday, I'd like to make sort of a memorial, our altar of repose, in a little corner of our house somewhere where we can take turns making a bit of a visit. And then, I think especially for small children, that change of, decorating the altar from it being pretty much bare on Easter Sunday is a wonderful surprise. On Good Friday, I might recommend parents have their children color Stations of the Cross and then post them around the house or outside, and then make a family walking from station to station. I did that as a kid in the woods behind our house, and it was really a beautiful way to connect. That's a little bit different experience than if you've only gone to the Stations of the Cross within a church.
Yeah, I've just a quick comment. Excuse me. For myself, honestly, if we could have avoided all these circumstances, of course we would have. I still think, as you both were talking, that I hope this is an opportunity for Catholics to, I guess, hunger in a way for the Eucharist again. I've been thinking of the words of, I believe it's Mary Magdalene, maybe Martha, at the end of one of the Gospels, where she says, "Where have they taken my Lord?" And with all this talk about beauty and the way that the liturgy shapes our lives, it has been, a real chasm in our family's life the last few weeks. And it calls to mind, Gwyneth, I know there's a quote, it's attributed to Dostoevsky. I don't know if he used these exact words, but he said, in effect, that beauty will save the world. And I think as Catholics, like St. Thomas Aquinas talked about the transcendentals, and he said, goodness, truth, and beauty. And when we think about apologetics, sometimes we get the goodness part, like, oh, like we're calling folks to a different kind of like way of living in the world. And the truth part, like these are the doctrines or the pillars of our faith. But sometimes, I don't know, like in apologetics especially, beauty doesn't enter into it so much. And I guess, you and Bo are friends. I'm less familiar with like your journey of faith. Could you maybe talk some about how beauty even drew you closer to God or deeper into the faith?
Yeah, I mean, I was very blessed to be raised Catholic, and actually, even within the traditional Mass, I didn't attend a Mass in English till I was in college, and so yeah, I feel like I always kind of grew up as a homeschooler, immersed in the traditional Mass, like um, looking on society a little bit from the outside and feeling a bit closer through looking at the church throughout history and throughout time. And I've always just felt drawn to things of beauty. And this is something that I've contemplated a lot, in raising my own children, but also meeting my husband. He was very much drawn to the faith through beauty. And so I think that different people seem to be called through different ways to Christ. And for some, it is through logical argument. For others, it's the beauty of charity. But for others, it's this sort of like mystical attraction to authentic beauty. And we think I know a lot of people are told, oh, in the Middle Ages we had to have stained glass windows and all of this decoration in the Gothic cathedrals for all of the people who are illiterate. Well, we forget that there's still a lot of illiterate people in churches today, and that's pretty much everyone under the age of 7. So for those young souls that are especially drawn to Christ through beauty, I think we owe it to them, particularly to make our spaces as beautiful as possible, before they even reach that level of being able to rationally enter into the truths of the faith.
No, Gwyneth, just to like make a shout out about, you pointed out that you were a homeschooler, and everybody's kind of homeschooling right now, whether they want to or not. I just want to point out the true Renaissance woman that you are, to show that like homeschoolers, they wrongly get pigeonholed. Not only were you an engineer, and not only now, are you an artist, but one of my favorite videos I've ever seen of you is we were down for one of the festivals down at Clear Creek, and somehow you ended up on someone's farm throwing an axe that was maybe like a quarter to a half your size. Like not to put you on the spot too much, but you're a rather small person, and this axe was huge. And impressively, you threw the axe really well. So everybody out there worried about, if I homeschool my kid, is it gonna, pigeonhole them? No, like we're talking right now to an engineer, an artist, and a supreme axe thrower. So everybody's going to be good. No, but I look.
To be fair, it was a hatchet.
Oh, it was a hatchet. Okay. Well, yeah. I was making it sound a little cooler, I'll admit. No, but I think it's really important to point out to people exactly what you said. I like making this point a lot of time with children in other arguments, where people will go like, well, if, for instance, like, well, what are we going to do if people can't work or won't work or things like this? And so I'll start talking about like, there's this huge group of people that we don't make work at all, and that we put aside an entire aspect of their life just to sit around in a building all day and not work. People are like, well, who is this? And you're like, well, it's school children, right? Like you could make your children work in factories, but you actually send them to school because there's this greater good. Well, it starts to be the same way. Children under 7, like you said, are quote unquote illiterate. I think there's a lot of adults who can read, but are something more like illiterate. They're not the reading type. And there's plenty of people who have, all sorts of disabilities, maybe, who don't end up reading. And all of us eventually will probably get to, if we are blessed with long life, the time where reading or even just sort of logical processes aren't sort of like firing on all the cylinders that they used to. And so people forget, it seems, that even if it were the case that a sort of like quick-minded, witty 30-year-old doesn't need beauty, which is absolutely not the truth, but even if that were true, we're surrounded by people in which the beauty of the thing is what transmits, like Bud was saying, those transcendentals. This is absolutely true in the church, but this is true, like what's true about God sort of overflows and spills out to human life in general. If we're not willing to think about that, about how beauty itself is uniquely human, the unique meeting up of the physical and the spiritual, so that through a physical sensation, we can consider spiritual things. We've depraved ourselves of something that makes us human. And I think this goes back one more time to something we're harping on, is if we don't feel like that's worth spending money on, what does that say about us? And, all artists have to deal with that if they're trying to make a living on their art. But Gwyneth, when you've had the chance to try to convince people of this, how do you try to sidestep this sort of idea of value, or maybe give a new sort of perspective to what we mean?
I think one of the big challenges today is that, there's all this talk, especially in Catholic liberal arts colleges, of the true, the good, the beautiful. But then, great, we can talk about beauty in the abstract, but what does that mean? As Americans, I think that there's still certain puritanical strains that say, well, beauty is good, but maybe not too much, because then we'll enter into the world of decadence or luxury. And I think a lot of people remain at maybe a childlike understanding of art, and their aesthetic is perhaps a bit tainted with a lot of popular images from the last 100 years that are maybe a bit kitsch or saccharine. And so, sometimes I'll be approached for a commission where someone says, I really want a copy of this painting, and I just, it's really hard if it's in really bad taste to begin with, and then they'd like a personal copy of it. I never quite know how to break it to them, but and when we were teaching, my husband and I were teaching a lot of freshmen at the Thomas More College of Liberal Arts for the past few years, and they came from so many different backgrounds. Some kids had never been into a museum before, or an art museum. And so there are certain forms, especially within the Christian tradition of art, that might look unusual to our eyes. But I think we need to take some risks and give it a chance and say, well, let's look at some Gothic art, or let's look at Mannerist or Baroque, and not have narrow preconceptions of what a picture of Mary or St. Joseph has to look like. So I think that one of the many things that Catholics should feel obliged to do is not only to have an informed conscience, but an informed aesthetic, and to take that on as something serious and necessary.
Gwyneth, we just have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to get to one of your specific pieces. Again, for our listeners, GwynethThompson-Briggs.com. And as Bo mentioned at the start of the show, you were commissioned to paint a piece as a gift for Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. And it's this beautiful rendering of St. Augustine at Study. Could you tell us some of the background of that piece, and what inspired you, maybe what you used in preparation for research to paint the piece?
Yeah, this was a very last-minute piece. A priest that I knew was on his way to have an audience with the Pope, and he needed it in just a couple of weeks. And I said, well, there's no way to do an oil painting. It won't dry. So I tried to do a very fast watercolor and get it framed and shipped, and made it just in time. But I still wanted to do the best job I could. So I contacted the local diocese and was able to purchase or to borrow an actual bishop's mitre and jeweled gloves. And then I asked my parish priest if I could borrow a cope. I found a model. And then I also found an Augustinian monk who was willing to lend me a habit. if you look at paintings of St. Augustine historically, he's often depicted in an Augustinian habit and then with the accessories of a bishop. The reason St. Augustine was chosen was because the priest who is visiting Pope Benedict knows that he is a great lover of Augustinian spirituality. And within this image, I have the hand of St. Augustine sort of clutching his glowing heart, reminding us of our hearts will be restless until they rest in thee, O Lord. Probably one of the most famous excerpts from the Confessions. And not to, well, I guess to change the subject, but I just wanted to mention very quickly, since we are almost out of time, do I have just a moment?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I've been really, there's just such a moment of hopefulness looking at Pope Francis when he visited very recently a couple of works of sacred art in Rome, the Maria Salus Populi Romani and the Crucifix in the Church of San Marcello on the Corso. Both of these works were processed in the streets of Rome to end plagues, the first in 593 and the second in 1522. And so I would love to ask your listeners to pray for sacred artists, and that if God wants to use one of them to create a special image for this time, I think that both Rome and the world could benefit greatly.
No, Gwyneth, I think that's great. Real quick, so your website and then the artist website, if you don't mind saying those for everybody.
Sure. My website is gwyneththompson-briggs.com. And the artist website for artists in all different disciplines, whether it's liturgical arts or very soon architecture and illumination, is the Catholic. It's just CatholicArtistsDirectory.com.
Gwyneth, the work you're doing, like both artistically, is beautiful. The work you're doing on the website and the artist directory is beautiful. And all of this is wonderful, and it's an honor, and it's great to finally have you on the show. And hopefully we'll have you back again. Thank you for coming on the show, Gwyneth.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Folks, that's our show. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our family, our city, our state, our nation, the entire world, the solar system, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.